Hi everybody, welcome back to DJ Creations 3D, and today we're learning a couple tips on how to optimize your renders. So here we are in the default scene in Blender 4.4, and to start out we're going to switch the render engine from Eevee to Cycles. That's what we're going to try to optimize today. Alright, so here we got our default cube and our camera. We also have a light source up here, light point. So if we press Z and then go into rendered view, we can see I'm rendering, alright, this is okay. It's rendered pretty quickly, but as you can see right now, I'm using my CPU because this is a new version of Blender and I haven't optimized it yet. So that's what we're going to learn, is how to optimize this. So let's switch from CPU to GPU. I'm pretty sure for Macs you can use GPU, which would be the M2, way faster than their CPUs. So right when I switch to GPU, you can see rendering done. Everything is like instantly, because it's a very simple scene to render. So GPU compute, if it's not doing anything, that either means you don't have a GPU, or if you go up to edit and down to preferences in system, if you have, I actually don't know what you do if you have a MacBook. It's probably either CUDA or OptiX. I'm going to use CUDA, and I've enabled my GPU that I have. And then Vulkan is a new thing that they've been using to display the graphics, and this is good for if you have very large scenes that you're using and you want to load them up quicker. But OpenGL is the one that's the default right now, because this is still experimental. So after you select CUDA, we're going to go down here to this tab and hit Save Preferences. So now already this is going to speed up our renders. Just to see how much it does, let's switch from CPU, let's go back to CPU. Let's set the max samples for the render to be 100, and let's just go render image. Let's go up here to render and hit go to render image. Now, as you can see, I'm going about 5 samples a second, and it looks like it's going to take about half a minute. So for this scene, that would take a long time. Half a minute for a 200 frame render, which would only be a couple seconds, would take 2 hours, and that's pretty slow. I mean, this is fairly fast for a CPU, but this is not what you want when you want professional quality stuff. So here we go, we're finishing it off. 96 samples, and we are pausing probably right now. Wait for it to append, and there we go, 33 seconds, and it looks good, but that was 33 seconds. So now let's go up here to slot 1, switch to slot 2. Now what this is going to do, it's going to save this here, but now we can view it here in slot 2. We can view the next render. So we're going to switch to slot 2, minimize that, and let's switch to GPU compute and re-render. Go render image, and we are almost done. Give it a sec. And there we go. 11 seconds compared to 33 seconds. That was insanely fast. So you can see, I don't think there's any visible difference. Yeah, it looks like exactly the same, because this is a simple scene. Alright, so let's close that. So that's number one tip. Switch from CPU to GPU if you have one. Tip number 2 is a little bit, like, not really a tip, more of like a feature. So use Eevee. If you have a GPU computer, use Eevee more, because I mean, this, with the new update, I know it's still going to be slow on certain computers, but it does look pretty good. I mean, look, with the ray tracing on how they did it, it looks really good for a real-time engine. I mean, look at this. We actually get ray tracing. Ray tracing isn't even on. Enable ray tracing. Look at this. I mean, it looks very close to how it would look in Cycles. And you can make very detailed, intricate models that still look good in Eevee. So if that's another tip, if Cycles is too slow, learn how to optimize Eevee and use it. So let's say we have a simple model here. Let's say we have the cube. Let's scale it down a little bit, move it up. Let's just make a simple scene real quick. I'm just gonna scale up this cube or this plane, and we're gonna let's go Shift EZ, make a couple of these. Scale this back down. Another thing I'm gonna do is change the world background to black. That way we only have light coming from this light source. Now we're in Eevee. We're learning how to optimize Cycles. So let's switch back to Cycles. And as you can see, renders are already slowed down a lot because we have to have light and ray tracing going on. But we're going to scale up this plane so we can't see it. We're going to take this point light, move it up on the Z axis. This. And what we're going to do is make the ground plane metallic all the way. And we can do it like 0.2 on the roughness, and then in displacement we're going to add a displacement, vector displacement, and then from the height, let me see, how do we do this? Can we do this from here? No, let's open a shading panel. Let's go to shader editor and displacement. Let's add a noise texture. take our noise texture, drag factor into, is it height? Yeah, height. Height, then let's scale. All right, let's go back to this view real quick, get a camera view that we want. Let's do it like this. Let's see, how's this looking? All right, that looks pretty good. Now what we want to do is just have a little bit of everything going on here. So for this top one, I want to make it an emission shader. So let's go emission, let's make it red, and let's up the strength. And then we're gonna go to compositor, add a glare node in, drop it in, add fog glow, change it to high quality. See how that's looking. Go camera. All right, that looks cool. Let's lower the strength to 10. All right, so let's go to here. Another thing, let's enable denoising. And if you have your GPU, make sure GPU is enabled, and set the pre-filter to fast if that's not automatic. So as you can see, we have a lot of stuff going on here now. So let's scale up this one like this. This is gonna look good. So let's scale up this middle cube and let's make a glass texture. Glass. And let's lower the roughness to like 0.2. Alright, for this one, let's make it a metallic texture. Let's turn off the compositor for right now. And let's make this a metallic. So we're going to go to glossy and lower the roughness to about 0.3. And for the last one, we're just going to make a subsurface scattering and lower the roughness too. So this is a lot of stuff going on in our scene now. As you can see, I'm rendering fairly fast because I have the denoise on, and I also have noise threshold. But so what we're gonna do is optimize this scene for cycles. So let's see. So first of all, we're gonna do a couple things that I always do. So for my default scene, when I start up Blender, every time it's gonna be set to cycles. It's gonna be set to GPU. Unless I'm doing something with displacement, I'm gonna have experimental on, which I think I'm gonna use actually for this ground plane to make it look better. I think that's gonna help. Let's keep this at height. I like that. Let's just go back to where we were. Okay, I like this. This looks good. All right, so cycles, experimental, we'll stay with supported. We'll go GPU compute. Now for the viewport, sampling really doesn't need to be above 550, I would say. I mean, you could use it below it depending on how much quality you want it for your viewport. If your computer's really slow, I'd stick to 150 or a little bit below that in the 100 range. That'd be good for your viewport. I'm gonna keep it at 1024 because my computer's fast and I can use that for my render. I denoise the viewport. If you're using optics for your rendering, enable optics. That uses your GPU for denoising, which speeds it up a lot. I might actually try that too. We can try that optimizing too at the end of this video. So let's close the denoiser. In the render tab, I usually have my default render set to 250 samples. That's a good amount, I think, for most things, as long as you don't have a lot of glass textures or metallic textures that you need to have a lot of light bouncing. I would set that to 500 or 550, sometimes up to 1000, depending on how clear you want it to be. I keep mine at 250 to start out with, and I edit it if I need it for the render. Noise threshold, for renders that I want to be very high quality, like my recent short film, my short project with the cubes, this I turned off because it makes it render longer. It just samples as much as it can, making it as clear and as smooth as possible. So for usually I disable that, but I usually leave it enabled for my default scene. Now denoising, as you see, defaultly it doesn't use your GPU. That's why my renders before were taking so long. It's because it was using my CPU to denoise. So we're gonna enable use GPU, and then if you're using a lot of glass textures, up the transparency and transmission. That will make the renders clear and they won't be flickering. Or you can go to integrated presets and enable full global illumination. If you hit that, as you can see, it turns everything to 32, which then increases the render time but also makes it more realistic. We're gonna leave it at default, and I think that's it for here. I usually use all this. Volumes, if you have volumetrics, I think most of this is pretty good. Now if you're gonna do motion blur, that's gonna slow down your computer a little bit, and I don't use motion blur a lot unless I have something that would really aid to the realism. But if you do, make sure you don't use this tip that I'm about to show you. Persistent data. If you're rendering something with a lot of scenes or with a lot of objects or collections in it that you have to render, persistent data makes it way faster because it does not have to load the memory into your RAM every single time it renders a frame. If this isn't enabled, every single time you're rendering a frame, it's having to reload all the object data, all the meshes, all the properties, everything back into your RAM. When this is enabled, it remembers it, it keeps it in your RAM. So I use that as long as I'm not using motion blur. Spatial splits also is used with my GPU. It helps it makes the builder times longer, but speeds up your renders. I usually use that. Also, if you're compositing, if you have a GPU, use your GPU, no CPU. It's gonna speed up a lot. I usually use full precision too, and that's how I composite. So with all that set, I think everything else is good. That's about what I use to optimize my renders. We're gonna see, so let's see how good I'm rendering right now. Let me make this pretty big. Let's go out of the camera, so let's see. Right now, as you can see from my sample count up here, I'm rendering fairly quickly. There's a lot in this scene going on. We have glass reflections, we have metallics, and we have subsurface scattering. Then we got a plane reflecting it all. So let me see here. Yeah, so how long is this taking to render? I mean, it's rendering fairly quickly. So let's see. Let's set everything. Let's set the render samples back to default value of 4096 and see how long this takes to render. Let's go render image. So with 4096 samples, I'm rendering in about half a minute, it looks like. As you can see with the denoising, this looks pretty good, very clear. It's a very simple scene, but it just has a lot of stuff going on. So rendering this pretty quick. This is with the RTX 4070, which I would recommend to anybody. I have a little bit slower CPU, but I can deal with that little hesitant loading in certain things because my GPU being so fast it's good enough for me. It's very good. So as you see, we're almost done, and with my GPU compositor, boom, it's done, and we got glare and everything. That took 31 seconds. It looks very good. So another thing I forgot to mention, if you have a slow computer like I did, I had a very, very slow laptop with an Intel i3 core, super slow. Is one of the slowest Windows computer you can have. What I had to do was I was doing any renders in cycles, which I didn't do a lot of renders in cycles. It was mostly still images that I rendered. If you're going to have a slow computer and you really want to make really cool stuff in Blender, use Eevee. Learn how to optimize Eevee, learn how to use it. And if you're in the newer version of Blender with their Eevee, which has ray tracing, I actually wouldn't recommend doing Eevee in this. I actually don't. When I had a slow computer, my slow computer will barely open something in Eevee compared to this new computer. But when I was opening stuff, it wouldn't render even on my slow computer. It's that slow. So that's why I would use an older version, 3.6 or 3.8. 4.0 I think didn't have ray tracing either, but with my 4070 and with my i7 6700K, it renders pretty good in Eevee, but I stick to cycles since I have a fast computer. I do use Eevee every once in a while, like my Eevee real-time render I did. And with this, let's lower the samples back to 250. Before we do that, let's go into the rendering tab and switch to slot 2. We'll switch to slot 2. And what we're going to do is go down here to performance, change the tile size to 250. This is what I had to do when I had a slow computer. What this does is it makes a smaller portion for your computer to render, which it just makes it so it doesn't crash, and that's a big tip, is just lowering the tile size. So let's go up here to rendering. We're in slot 2. Let's go render image. So this is looking like it's going to take about 5 seconds. Looks pretty fast. Denoising, compositing, 5 seconds. Let's see if there's any quality difference. Slot 1, slot 2. We can see a little bit up down here in the metallic, but nothing that's going to mess up your render. It looks good. Let's see down here in the reflections. Let's see slot 1, slot 2. This one's a little bit smoother. I would see how much that is, but this still gives you a good enough quality, I would say. And then maybe 500 samples would make it a little bit better, but I like this. I mean, look at this. For saving the time of 31 seconds to 5 seconds, I mean, that's optimizing a lot right there. So that's a big tip. Make sure that you lower your tile size if you have a slower computer and enable persistent data. I think that's most of the tips that I have for this. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that you can do. Use Eevee, learn how to use Eevee, and make your renders really cool. I mean, I've made a lot of cool stuff in Eevee when I had a slow computer, which I had for about a year and a half that I was doing this on. And I mean, just have fun and keep making your stuff. And if you have any comments or ideas of different tips that you guys have or stuff you want to share with me or any ideas, thank you for watching, and please comment below. And thank you for subscribe and like if you enjoy my content, and thank you for watching. God bless.